if we actually believe that our system is what we say it is, then we ought to be willing to test it.
Hello, and welcome to Sanctuary in the Jungle. I'm your host, Aaron Nelson. I'm excited to introduce you to our next guest, Professor James Coleman. Today, we're going to talk about his experience in post-conviction work, including wrongful convictions, death penalty cases, and his representation of Ted Bundy. In today's world of true crime, Professor Coleman brings a fresh perspective on what's really important about these cases, following our principles. As my good friend Jessa Nicholson said, principles aren't principles if you only follow them when they're convenient. It's in cases like Ted Bundy where all of us must be reminded to follow these principles despite our emotional reactions. Professor Coleman now teaches at Duke Law School, where he is the co-director of the Wrongful Convictions Clinic, inspiring the next generation of criminal defense attorneys. We start our conversation discussing an article he wrote with Michael Tiger titled Sanctuary in the Jungle about Tiger's defense of Terry Nichols. In 1995, Nichols was charged with 168 counts of homicide for allegedly helping Timothy McVeigh carry out the Oklahoma City bombing. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Here's Professor James Coleman. Well, welcome, Professor Coleman. I'm so glad that you can be here in our sanctuary here at the library in Hudson, Wisconsin. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, thanks. I'm very happy with the place we ended up here. And so, as some people may know, you were the author with Michael Tiger of an article in a small book called Trial Stories, in which you talk about the Terry Nichols defense that was done by Michael Tiger. And the title of that is A Sanctuary in the Jungle. And so I'd read that. I'd heard Michael Tiger speak about it on a different podcast. And then I kind of got fascinated with that phrase. And as I was reading through that, I came to learn there's two different authors here. And I Googled your name and your phone number came up and I just dialed it on a Friday afternoon and you answered your phone.
I did. And it was a surprise call, but a very welcomed one. And you told me what you were doing, and I thought, wow, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm just happy that I was brave enough, I guess, to just call. Happy that you were kind enough and to answer the call, and then obviously answer the call here. So again, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. And
maybe that's a good place to start. Okay. Tell me how you got involved in with Michael Tiger in that article.
Well, so I've mentioned this to you before that, the article really was written by Michael. He was visiting at Duke. I knew him through work I had done with the American Bar Association. At one time, I was chair of the section on individual rights and responsibilities, and he was active in criminal defense side of the ABA. But when he came to Duke, he was working on this. He was editing the trial stories, and he asked me if I would like to work with him on this article that he was doing. So I said, sure. I've never worked with him on anything.
Yeah.
And my contribution was primarily just helping to edit it, except that I was struck by, his use of, the concept of a sanctuary in the jungle. And
so tell me a little bit about that. I know that was a theme that he used throughout the trial. It was a phrase that he used, I believe, both in with the court when he was deciding on a change of venue, but also I think throughout the rest of the trial. And how did that resonate with you? What did that mean to you?
This is a very difficult case for the defense lawyers. I represented McVeigh and Nichols, So the question is, if you're a defense lawyer in a case like that, where you've got a lot of public hostility directed at you, probably judges, not being particularly friendly, and you've got a client who, just about everybody despises. How do you do you function in a
Yeah.
situation like that, and how do you get your client comfortable with the idea that he might get a fair trial? And so what Michael said was that, that the trial has to be the sanctuary where we are to be able to relate to our client as a human. We are to be able to get judges who, make decisions unaffected by what's going on around them. And if we can do that, then it's like a sanctuary in this jungle that surrounds what we're doing. And I thought, that's a really good concept.
I love that concept.
Yeah.
And I just, and I think in the book you describe it as, a place where there's compassion,
Yes.
but also reason,
Correct.
right? And so
Correct.
for me, as I'm looking at it, it's both how we treat people in it, with dignity
Yep.
and
Yep.
respect and compassion for their situation, but more so for the people in power
Yes.
to how they make decisions. Because
Correct.
as you say, it's easy in those in cases in which there's a lot of emotion, there's
Yeah.
a lot of trauma, there's maybe been a lot of harm
Yep.
that has happened
Yep.
for people to make decisions on something other than reason
Yep.
or rational process.
Well, and the lawyers are in communities. They've got to go back to the community when the case is over. And so, public doesn't always understand this notion that a guy like Terry Nichols deserves a lawyer.
Yeah.
And deserves a lawyer who challenges the state's evidence. It's like, well, it's clear he's guilty, so why are we doing this?
It really, it's I love the concept of the sanctuary, right? But it's almost sometimes hard as an acting criminal defense lawyer to explain it to friends or family or somebody that's not into it, because it seems so obvious and second nature to me.
Yeah.
You're a teacher, you're a professor here. Is that something that you help with your students? If so, how do you do that? How do you communicate that need for everybody have the dignity and everybody gets a lawyer? Everybody should be involved in a sanctuary.
In a different way, because it's kind of two levels on which it works. One is that you're a student in law school, and this is where you can try out stuff without worrying about there being a backlash or
Sure.
or something like that. But then on the other hand, when you're out there and you're defending a client, you're that client's best friend, and you want to be able to defend that client in circumstances where your client is being treated with dignity as a human being, and people are listening to your argument.
Yeah, because sometimes just our mere presence, standing next to somebody who's been accused, there's these claims against them, that might bring down our credibility, the perception of our credibility. And so how do you do that? What do you tell the students?
Exactly. Well, I tell them that, the focus has to be on the client, and basically, if your reputation is good, people respect you. Some of that may wear off on your client if you don't try to distance yourself from the client.
So it goes both ways.
Goes both ways, and you've got to embrace your client. And you're not saying that, I'm my that what my client did is what I would have done, or that this is something that I think is not serious. But what you're saying is that I represent this person as a human being, and my job is to make sure that he's treated fairly in the court.
Yeah. A word that I've liked to use lately is just modeling, and I find it to be so often in the courtroom, we as the criminal defense attorneys are actually the ones that are trying to model the behavior for the judge, model the behavior for the prosecutor, model the behavior for everybody else. But it's just the small things. Yep. Is that part of what you're teaching?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the worst thing that you can see in court, and we see these in capital cases where a lawyer is appointed to represent somebody who's charged with a heinous crime, and the lawyer doesn't want to be associated with it. Yeah. So they sit at the table and they they barely, relate to the client during the proceedings. Everybody sees that.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so if you do that, you're sending a message.
Absolutely.
Having nothing to do with the facts. It's just that you don't think this is somebody you want to be associated with, and everybody else gets that message.
Well, let's just circle back, because I could go on for this forever, but let's circle back and learn more about you,
Okay.
Professor Coleman. So you're here in Hudson, Wisconsin. Thank you. Where are you from?
I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina, originally.
Okay. Is that where you grew up?
I grew up there. I left after high school and did a postgraduate year at a high school in New Hampshire at Phillips Exeter Academy.
I was reading a little bit about that bio, and that seemed like an extraordinary experience, an extraordinary opportunity, just, a life-changing, perhaps, event. Tell us, how did that come to be?
I had a guidance counselor at my high school, and although I graduated from high school in 1965, it was still segregated.
Okay.
Right? So all black high school. But she had a very good friend who was in the Mills family in North Carolina, very wealthy, famous family.
Okay, just a prominent,
yeah. And the Mrs. Cannon wanted to send some student from my high school to a summer program at Exeter, and so my guidance counselor suggested that she send me.
She picked you.
She picked me, and it's the first time I'd been out of North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Took a bus up to New Hampshire.
That's a long bus ride.
That was a very long bus ride. And but it was the most extraordinary experience I had ever had.
Yeah.
I mean, it was education on a level that I couldn't have imagined. And they invited me to stay and, just finish out high school there. But I was going to graduate number one in my high school back in Charlotte, so I didn't want to miss that
opportunity.
And for my, my parents, my mother, to see me graduate.
Sure.
So I went back, and they said, "Okay, well, why don't you come back for another year?" So I did that, and it was just extraordinary.
How we'll probably talk about culture in other ways, whether it be the sanctuary or some other things, but it sounds like the learning culture there was different.
Yes, exactly.
And that impacted it?
And that made all the difference in the world.
Okay.
That allowed me to sort of think beyond, what I could dream at the time that I was in Charlotte. I mean, I think my dreams had a limited horizon.
Okay.
Exeter opened that up, and so.
And there's like a table there. There was a concept that I hadn't heard about, but I read about it.
The Harkness table.
What's the Harkness table?
It's how all classes, science, math, history, English, are taught around a Harkness table, which is a conference room table. It's an oval. And the professor and the students sit around the table, and we talk about whatever the subject is. And so it draws you out. You can't hide. It's very small, 12 students maybe, and the professor.
Are there some rules or a way of how you engage in conversation or discussion around the Harkness table?
It is. I mean, so it's about, how you have a discussion about things that about which you may disagree, but to be agreeable when you disagree, to be willing to talk about things you're not comfortable with, things you don't really know a lot about, but you can, even in that circumstance, you can ask questions and so forth. So it draws you into the process, and that's the education. That's kind of where it happens.
Sounds like a table we'd put in a sanctuary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How much? I mean, that's maybe we'll tie that in later. But it seems like that's very tied to what your some of your core concepts about just dignity and listening to everybody.
Absolutely, respect for the people around the table.
And that's something that you got from this experience at Exeter.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of the students were from prominent, families. They were, third and fourth generation.
I think you'd said you were like
Exonians.
hanging out with the grandson of a president.
Yes, Eisenhower.
Okay.
In my English class, and the two of us, he would write about some of the stuff he did with his grandfather, and I would write about hanging out in this, overgrown wooded area near my house that we call the Big Jungle, and our classmates found both of those things fascinating.
Yeah, they had equal value around the Harkness table.
And different experiences, different than the experiences that most of them had.
Okay.
Right.
How did that experience then allow you to move forward? Where did you move from there?
Well, so as a result of that, I started to think about going to an Ivy League school because that's where my classmates were going.
Sure.
Whereas in Charlotte, I applied to, I actually applied to some colleges before I left to go to Exeter for that postgraduate year. All of the colleges I applied to were in North Carolina,
okay,
and were historically black colleges.
Okay.
I didn't apply to the University of North Carolina because I wouldn't have got in.
Oh.
This is in 1965.
Okay.
So,
Did that change after Exeter?
I go to Exeter, and all of a sudden I got into Harvard, Princeton, Columbia.
Wow. And so which one did you pick?
So I picked Harvard.
You'd said you wouldn't have been accepted to North Carolina.
Mm-mm.
Did you, after Exeter?
In fact, my high school had more people accepted to Harvard than UNC.
Really?
I was accepted at Harvard, and that was it.
Nobody was
none
accepted?
of us. No, nobody
Wow.
accepted at UNC. In fact, we didn't apply.
Just because of that?
We knew we wouldn't get in. They were just beginning to change that, but
Okay.
not in time that we thought that was something for us.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's, I can't imagine how that feels when your own, to some degree, your
Yeah.
own community, your own
Right.
state, right, is
Right.
saying no, but people outside can see things in a different way and see
Right.
you in a different way and appreciate you in a different way.
Yeah, we appreciated UNC as our flagship university. We knew that, and we were proud of UNC. But we didn't see ourselves as UNC students. And I think Exeter changed that.
Yeah. Well, so you go to Harvard. You start there in 66?
66,
Okay.
and graduated in 70.
That must have been a tough time to be coming out of college.
Very interesting times.
Yeah.
The very first thing that happened in the fall was that Robert McNamara, who was Secretary of Defense, came to visit campus, and there was a big demonstration, and his car was stopped right outside of my house.
Oh.
And I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. So, we had a lot of anti-war activities. University closed down at times, stuff like that going on. Some classes weren't finished when they bombed Cambodia.
Okay.
But I had a really good group of roommates. I also I volunteered at a small private school in Cambridge called Charles River Academy, and I wanted to be a teacher.
Oh.
But I loved working with the students, so I took a full-time job the year after I graduated from college as a teacher at this school. And then my draft status changed to 1A.
Oh.
So I needed to do something to avoid going to Vietnam. So I joined the Navy JAG program.
Okay.
And went to Columbia. And so I had a 4-year commitment to go into the Navy. But because the war was winding down, they allowed me to be a law clerk for a year, which I did in Detroit. And then
was that your first experience with the law, or had you been a law clerk in Charlotte at all?
No, I was, that was my first experience as a lawyer.
Okay.
When ordinarily in law school, second year, you do a summer job,
Yep.
in law. My summer job was to go to Newport in the Navy.
Oh, sure. Had you thought about lawyering or the law before
Yes.
before the 1A status change?
Yes, I did. I had my senior year in high school. I got a job with Julius Chambers. He was a lawyer, civil rights lawyer, very well known in Charlotte and among the civil rights community. He had just opened his office in 1965, which is the year I graduated from high school. So I was like his original staff. I was a guy who reshelved books in the library. And I thought what he did was, just extraordinary. And so I started to think about law.
Yeah.
I had no other experience with law or lawyers. And then when I was at Exeter, his home and his office were bombed.
Oh, geez.
Because of the civil rights work that he was doing.
Were you still in contact with him? And
I was. I thought, wow, that's kind of a extraordinary reaction to a lawyer. So that
didn't turn you off. That didn't scare you?
No, it said to me that there must be something powerful about being a lawyer if that's kind of how people are reacting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're on your journey to becoming a criminal defense attorney. You took some other experiences.
Exactly.
How did you get to become a criminal defense attorney?
Well, I had no interest in criminal law as a law clerk, in practice at my law firms. But I was interested in public interest and interested in pro bono work. And I was at Wilmer Cutler and Pickering in D.C., prominent D.C. firm that did a lot of public interest work. And I had two young associates, who wanted to do a death penalty case in Florida.
Had you ever done a death penalty case?
Never done any kind of criminal case. So they asked me if I would supervise them. I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that, but you're going to have to do the work.
And is this a post-conviction?
This was post-conviction. This was under a death warrant. So it was more than just post-conviction, right? He was scheduled to be executed in like 17 days.
Wow. Talk about thrown into the deep end.
So there was no chance the students, I call them students, they're young associates, were going to be able to do the case by themselves. So the three of us went down to Gainesville, and we stayed there until we got a stay of execution the day before the execution was scheduled. We got it in the 11th Circuit.
So you were successful to do that?
And it was the first successor case in Florida. So he had already gone through one round of post-conviction litigation. And when they signed the death warrant, people thought that he would definitely be executed because he had already been through. So we went down and we were able to get a stay of the execution. And eventually, after I had left my law firm and came to do, the last thing I did in his case was to get his death sentence overturned.
Oh, wonderful. So you're 37, you've never done this work, and you got 17 days, and you go down and you sit across the table from another human being who's due to, be executed in 17 days.
Correct.
Where do you find the will to know how to communicate, to what's going through your head, through your body, through all of that? That just seems overwhelming to me, even as an experienced 54-year-old criminal defense attorney. What am I going to say to this person across the table from me?
Well, my students were special education students, right, when I was a teacher. So for 4 years in college, and then for the 1 year I was a full-time teacher, I was teaching students who were had some emotional disability or something like that. So, I knew, I needed to relate to my client in the way that I related to my students. I mean, again, I had to treat them like humans. I didn't treat them like their disability. I treated them like somebody who should be accorded dignity. So I went down to to Stark, Florida, where the prison was, and we met this young man, spent a day talking to him about his case, and I found him fascinating. He was very smart. He was a writer and a poet.
Oh, wow.
Pretty extraordinary guy. And, we just had to figure out how to stop this execution.
Yeah. So you successfully did that. You stop it. There's got to be a little bit of a break, a little bit of a time for an insightful man like yourself to reflect, to think about it. I mean, and you decide, sign me up again, or let's do that. What about that?
I didn't. Sort of. I mean, so the original case, once we got a stay of execution, the case continued. So I was still litigating it. But I hadn't taken on anything different. And that doesn't happen until 3 years later.
Okay. Tell me about that.
That's when there's a warrant on Bundy, and his case is pending in the U.S. Supreme Court, and he personally filed the cert petition. So pro se.
A cert petition is a petition for a writ of certiorari, a formal request for a higher court to review a lower court's decision. Pro se is a Latin term meaning for oneself. It is used in a legal context in reference to someone representing themselves as their own lawyer. Here, Professor Coleman tells us he got involved in this case after Bundy acted as his own attorney and filed his appeal himself.
And the court doesn't like to deal with pro se litigants.
Sure.
And the people in Florida basically, wanted to recruit somebody who would take the case. So because of the work that I'd done, they asked me if I would ask the Supreme Court for a stay. I didn't even focus on who he was, right? So I had a student. She wanted to do a capital case, so I sent her to Florida to ask the Florida Supreme Court to stay the execution. We knew they would say no, but we had to do that before we went into the U.S. Supreme Court. So this gave her a trip to Florida, although it's Tallahassee, so no big deal. But when she got there, she was mobbed by the press, and she had no idea what was going on. And then we focused on who this was.
As a criminal defense law firm, protecting our clients' privacy is everything. When we set out to upgrade our website, we wanted more than just a site. We needed an all-in-one solution to safeguard client data and make content marketing easier. The last thing we can afford is a data breach or a patchwork of tools that don't talk to each other. That's why we chose Made Daily for our website and secure digital headquarters. With Made Daily, our clients can securely upload documents, complete intake forms, and communicate with us, all inside a private client portal that's encrypted end-to-end. It even links directly to our law practice software, Smokeball, so our team doesn't waste time duplicating files or juggling logins. Everything is connected. Everything stays secure. Made Daily's secure digital headquarters gives us peace of mind, and it gives our clients confidence that their most personal information is protected. Learn more at madedaily.com. Your business, one secure place.
And so she came back. The Supreme Court granted a stay. It didn't require a lot of lawyering. We just had to file the papers. And, we looked at the case and some interesting issues. So I offered to become his counsel. If he wanted us to amend his petition and then see what happened after that. And so he agreed.
And you stayed on and continued to represent
until his execution.
Now, I have to imagine, what little I know about what he was convicted of, and the beginnings of almost the true crime genre that now we see within America and maybe across the world. But he was, I imagine, somebody that was hard to get a sanctuary for him. It was hard for anybody to build one, to let him into one.
Correct. That's where the notion of a sanctuary really kind of, hits you when you've got a case like that. Basically, somebody who's known nationwide, who's suspected of having done just horrendous things, both in Seattle and Utah and Colorado and then in Florida. Everybody in Florida knew him as a result of his criminal cases because he played a prominent role. So there was nobody who didn't have an opinion about him.
Sure.
And all of them had negative opinions.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you get a judge to pay attention to
to even listen?
Exactly. So that was the challenge in that case, was to make a sanctuary, find a sanctuary. How do you create a space where you can, where he is treated as a human, and we get a judge who will listen to the claims, because they weren't frivolous,
They were real claims.
very real claims.
Did you, again, happy to know as much about it as you're willing to share, but were you able to create, a bit of a space for that?
I think so, and I'll tell you where it happened. We got an evidentiary hearing, right? We won on appeal to the 11th Circuit. What they should have done was to overturn his conviction, because they said the trial judge should have determined whether he was competent based on some of the things that were happening in the case. But what they did was to say, well, we'll give you a retrospective hearing. But at the evidentiary hearing, one of the things that I decided to do, because I knew that there was going to be a hostile courtroom. So one of the things that I thought, because I had spent a lot of time with the defense lawyers, and I could see how beaten down they were from dealing with this. So I took the elected public defender to dinner that night. He was going to be my first witness.
Okay.
And rather than preparing him with questions that I wanted him to, I asked him to talk about what it was like to be Bundy's lawyer. And that's what we talked about at dinner. And then, because what I wanted was for him to kind of get back in touch with those feelings. So that
the feelings of just being overwhelmed
and overwhelmed in a way that, prevented him from being able to save his client, meaning being able to do his best for his client, because his client was making that impossible. And so then I put him on the stand, and the first question I asked him was about, the difficulty he had representing Bundy, and what was his goal during that period. And he says, I was trying to save his life.
Yeah.
And he didn't seem to understand that. And that was kind of captured the courtroom.
The lawyer was saying that Ted Bundy didn't understand that the lawyer was trying to save his life.
And that what Ted Bundy was doing was making it impossible.
Yeah.
For the lawyer to be successful.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that is that I think one of the few times that I thought, he responded to something with genuine emotion was after he heard his lawyer testify at that hearing. We took a break and went back, and and it was he normally he would say what he thought should be said in the situation, but this time
he recognized somebody else.
It seemed right, exactly.
Well, I have to say, is for you, just thinking of you as the lawyer, like that's incredibly perceptive, because as you'd said, you hadn't been practicing criminal defense lawyer, you haven't been doing the trial work, right? And as somebody who does the trial work, I think the hardest thing to convey to others who don't do this work is sometimes just the extreme loneliness of the work. You're standing there next to a human being, and everybody is against you. So, I mean, it's sometimes you have your client's family there, which is fantastic. But, I had a trial recently here in St. Croix County, and on the morning of the trial, I felt kind of desperate, but I just sent out a group text to 10 of my buddies, was just like, I just need to see a friend in the courtroom.
Yeah. No, exactly.
And I was, here I am doing this 30 years, 54 years old. It's my own community, but I just, I needed a friend in that room, and because it is so lonely.
Yeah, no, it really is. One of the other things that I did, so there were two cases we were litigating for Bundy. And in one of them, which was in Miami, what the governor started doing in 1986, which was the 10th anniversary of the Griggs decision. So he wanted to execute Bundy on that was going to be the 10th anniversary thing.
The Gregg decision refers to the 1976 Supreme Court case Gregg versus Georgia. The Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty was not cruel and unusual punishment.
So we had this federal district court judge who basically had done family law before he was appointed. So he didn't know anything about habeas. I tried to get the press to take seriously the issues we were, otherwise I wouldn't talk to them about, the case. And the judge, the federal district court judge made a mistake, which is that he ruled against us summarily, but he didn't have the record.
Okay.
So I knew he was going to be reversed in the 11th Circuit. So I was able to confidently say to the press that these are serious issues and that I was confident that the 11th Circuit was going to overturn what the judge had done, and that we were going to have a chance to present the evidence in support of our claims. And, a year later, that's what happened. The court overturned it, yelled at the prosecutor for not confessing error. So all of a sudden it looks like, hey, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about.
James Coleman knows what he's saying.
But I wanted them to take seriously, what we were doing, because normally they just show up and they want to know when is execution going to be.
Yeah. So, the state of the media, that's what still continues to surprise me.
Yeah.
This state, I've not taken like national cases, but just the lack of an understanding. Yep. Recently there was a wonderful profile of a fantastic criminal defense attorney from Atlanta, and it was in the New Yorker. And I think it was Attorney Steele, and it was a great article about this attorney. Yeah. But the writer at the end said and implied he's special because he presumes his clients are innocent.
Yeah.
And I don't know this attorney. He sounds like he's brilliant, fantastic, excellent lawyer. For many ways, I'm sure he is unique. But for the media to think that a criminal defense attorney is unique and special just because they merely follow the law and presume their client was innocent was just, to me, shocking. That at that high level of journalism, you must have abundance of stories.
No. I think one of the things that I did when I left my firm to go to Duke was to commit to talking to members of the press, largely on background about the law, and about criminal law and about the system, to help educate them so that they could cover stories. And so, journalists in North Carolina knew me for that reason, that I would talk to them. So when the Duke lacrosse case happened, a lot of the people who covered it knew me, and the fact that I was criticizing the prosecutor, they paid attention to that. But you're right. A lot of these journalists, they have no clue how the system works, what the defense lawyer does, the relationship between the defense lawyer and the client. They don't know.
And it's sad because obviously all of us get information sometimes from the media. Yep. I get information from the media about things that I don't know.
Yep.
If I weren't a criminal defense attorney, I might be relying upon this, but here's the source of information, and whether the reporter is Columbia educated or, Duke educated, or they just don't really know criminal defense.
Right. And they have some, obvious questions that they ask. And usually what they're looking for is a quote from the lawyer that they plug into a story. And I always wanted them to be concerned about the story and know something about the story.
Were you able to help shape that or do that in any way? Can you think of any time that
I think so.
Think of any stories that you were able to help shape?
I was thinking about, there's an article written in, I think it's Legal Times, it was called. It's sort of the American Lawyer, but it was a DC subsidiary.
Okay.
But the Legal Times sent him down to Florida for the first day of the evidentiary hearing. And I talked to him on background before the hearing to tell him what was going on and what he was going to see and all that. And he came down and he then wrote a really good story. And I think the title was Bundy's Last Lawyer or something like that.
Okay.
But it was a really good story about what we were doing. And one of the things that he wrote was about some of the sort of courtroom regulars who show up for, big trials, and
Sure.
they tend
Now
to
they
be
can stay home on the
cynical.
couch and watch court TV, but
Right, exactly.
then they had to show up.
Exactly, they had to show up. And he wrote about this one woman who was, I guess, prominent among this group, who said that, and he said that she was touched by our case.
It has to be a comment about you.
Well, but it was also about the journalists who knew that was important and wrote about it. And I think it also, a story like that helps shape the sanctuary, right? Because
Absolutely.
it says that, you should take this seriously. This is not just something that you check off and move on to the next court. You should pay attention to what's going on here.
Yeah, so I've kind of developed recently my last 3 trials, which thankfully have all resulted in not guilty verdicts, but I've framed my closing within this sanctuary in the jungle theme. I use the quote.
Yeah.
I kind of have a structure to it. I frame it. The first 2 times I did it, it felt like it felt really natural. It felt like I was connecting with the jury in a way. In the last one, I still got the result I wanted, but maybe it was just me, maybe it was the place, but I felt as if people were looking at me like, why should we give anybody a sanctuary?
Yeah.
Why should we give anybody a sanctuary? Right. And that's where I've been pondering that. Like, it's hard for me to get to a space to think, why wouldn't we want a sanctuary? What are we afraid of? Why are we afraid of being kind? Why are we afraid of using reason? Why are we afraid of that? But that's what boggles me with the media.
Yeah.
Like, why are they afraid of not talking about that?
No, exactly.
Why shouldn't we aspire to that?
And treating the issues as being serious.
Yeah.
And treating the person as being a human, accused of doing terrible things.
Sure.
But terrible things are going to happen to him if he ultimately is convicted.
Yeah, that it just at a surface level, I guess that's our job, is to continually to persuade, to tell our stories that.
Yeah. And not just the judge, but I viewed it as anybody who would listen. Actually listen, I would talk to. I remember on the first day of our evidentiary hearing, there was a group of high school students a teacher had brought to the proceeding. And when it was over, I talked to them.
Sure.
I brought them into the well and talked to them about the case. And because, I felt that part of my job was to also educate people, because if they're better educated, it'll be better for my client.
Sure. Yeah. If we go back to the media a little bit, maybe it's in Mr. Bundy's case, maybe it's in a different case, but what questions do you think they should be asking?
Yeah.
Can you think of any they should be asking more of these types of questions, or other than just the looking to say, like, when's an execution date? Obviously that's not with dignity.
Well, I think they should be trying to understand what the issues are.
Okay.
So we get a lot of journalists who, you say, well, this conviction violated the Constitution. And they would say, well, that's just a technicality. So, get them to see that the Constitution is not a technicality.
Yeah, right.
And that it's important, and understand, the particular issue that we're raising and why that's important. A lot of them won't bother to do that because they don't care.
Sure.
For them, the story is you've got this guy who's going to be executed, and he has these lawyers who are running around trying to frustrate the state's, effort to execute this guy, but eventually he'll probably get executed. And
Yeah.
so the public has no idea what we're doing and why we're trying to stop the execution and so forth. So I always wanted them to understand the issues. It's like, some journalists would almost laugh at us, that we were raising a question about whether Bundy was competent to stand trial. And I said, are you serious? What a joke.
I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't boggle me. Maybe I claim it does. I shouldn't be surprised anymore that why don't we want it to be different? Why don't we want the courtroom to be in a different analysis, a different space, a different everything else?
Where we believe that this person whose life may be on the line got a fair hearing.
Yeah.
It's like if we actually believe that our system is what we say it is, then we ought to be willing to test it.
Yeah.
Let's see it. Be fair. Have a judge who's interested, who focuses on what the law is, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. The jury instructions, as you know, before juries make decisions, the judges instruct them on the law. And what I've been trying to do is pull out the words that the judge tells the jury that I think are sanctuary-esque. Be careful and deliberate. Use sound reason. Be conscientious. All of these words, they're already built into the system. They're already built into the instructions.
Right.
And it feels as if sometimes when I pull those out, it's like, yeah, but we don't really mean that.
Right.
We don't really mean that.
Right.
We hear the word accountability. I hear the word accountability and on my side, and it tends to be a word that I think the prosecutors try to use and weaponize.
Right.
But I've heard you say it in a way that you own it. Tell me about what accountability means for you and your role with accountability.
Well, so, when I talk about accountability, my assumption is that the default should be the sanctuary, that the system ought to provide sanctuary. And so because I think that that's kind of the way the system ought to function, then I think that those of us involved in it should work toward that effort, and that we should hold each other accountable for doing that. So I hold myself accountable to do that. I want prosecutors to do that. I want judges to do that. I want the law enforcement officials to do that. And I want the public to hold all of us accountable.
Yeah, that this is a space we should have and we should make
and
protect.
And for it to function properly and in everybody's best interest, the public ought to demand it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I want. I want the, so when I go to the bar about the prosecutor who has done something that is clearly unprofessional, I say to the bar, hold this person accountable. If this was a defense lawyer who had done exactly the same thing, you would suspend the person or take his license. Don't protect these guys, because you protect them is why they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the biggest irony is most of the time the person sitting next to us at the table is somebody that is alleged to have behaved below the standards, right? And everybody there is wanting to talk about how that person should have thought more about it, how they should have considered the consequences, how they should have been all of this, but yet that type of behavior isn't always being modeled in the courtroom.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, we're just echoing whatever that person is that got us here. They're emotive, they're intuitive, they're reactive. And so that's where I feel like that's just wonderful to be like, let's model this and let's hold each other accountable to model it.
Exactly. It's sort of interesting. I'm constantly surprised by how honorable my clients are in some circumstances.
Absolutely.
Where you wouldn't expect it necessarily. You hope for it, but it doesn't always happen. and they surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, I've like anybody lost some cases, won some cases. 2 clients of mine that I've recently had cases in which I thought that they were acting in self-defense, and the jury came back and said something different.
Yep.
And I think oftentimes as lawyers, we look at our own performance of what could I have done better?
Yeah.
I wasn't good enough. I was less than. I was this. And I remember both of these clients who were just been convicted of something that I don't think they should have been convicted for. I went in and saw them in custody because that's where they were. And they both, I distinctly remember, they just look at me and they're like, "Are you okay, Aaron?
Yeah.
Like, you did a good job. Don't worry about it. You did it."
Yeah.
And I'm just like, it's just so moving, so remarkable that they had this happen to them.
Yep.
Right. And they're here to comfort me.
Yeah. No, it's one of the things that you see often in exonerations is that people come out and they're not bitter.
Yeah. How do you do that?
I say, I don't see myself doing that.
Yeah.
I would be so angry.
Yeah, right.
But it's important not to be angry if you can avoid it. And I'm sometimes just blown away by how, people who've been treated so badly, put in prison, innocent, kept in prison by, prosecutors and attorney generals who I think know that these people were innocent, and yet they get out and it's like, they don't look back in bitterness. They try to move on.
It's really remarkable. And maybe it's what we talked about, the modeling, right? And so often,
maybe I hope.
They're modeling character to me sometimes.
Exactly.
They're modeling,
exactly.
Which circles back to the dignity, right? That if you show them dignity, they're going to be able to show us,
man, I tell you,
respect and dignity back.
Yeah.
So when you're in that setting and you're going through this, trying to build a sanctuary, and maybe you're feeling alone, I know you were concerned about burnout. I would imagine you live in this world. You still have to be concerned about it. What are the thoughts and advice that you give to your students now that you've gone through these experiences yourself to say, here's what you need to do to avoid the burnout? Or you think you've just been blessed with a certain disposition?
No, I mean, I do have, but I think it's not to internalize it all. You got to talk to people.
Okay.
And, you got to talk to your client. Let your client share some of that burden too. You're going to do everything you can to, prove to a judge that your client is innocent, but you may not succeed.
Yeah.
And so the client has to understand that. But what we tell the client, and then what I say to my students is that, but even if we lose initially, we're not going to give up. We'll never give up as long as we think there's an avenue that we can pursue. We're making a commitment to you that we'll pursue it. If we run out of avenues, then obviously there's nothing we can do. But that's what got to keep you going, is that ultimately you believe that you've got to be able to show that your client is innocent once you conclude that it's likely that he is. Now the question is, how do you prove it, and how do you find the evidence to convince the people you have to convince?
Yeah. There's almost an absurdity of the work that we do, in the sense that I feel like at least for me, I'm drawn to the work because I think in many ways the system is unfair.
Yeah.
It's unfair, and so I have to do this.
Yeah.
But yet, knowing that it's unfair, I have to have sometimes this optimism that
Right.
I'm gonna convince somebody otherwise in this case, that I'm gonna do something else, and it's
Correct.
It's almost sometimes crazy to think that, but we have to just continue to think that, even in this unfair world that we went there because it's unfair.
See, I think, you have these two statements on your walls.
Yeah.
That stuff like that.
Inspirational.
Oh my God. I love that kind of thing. on the flight over here, I watched the movie about Winston Churchill,
Oh,
Our Darkest Hour or something like that.
okay.
But at the end, he makes the speech about, we're going to fight them on the beaches. We're going to fight them. We're never going to give up. I mean, that gets to me.
Oh yeah, I'm a sucker for that stuff too.
And I like to put our cases in that context.
Yeah.
That what we're trying to do, if we're successful, you're not going to do a lot of things in your career more important than that.
Yeah. I'm sure you've read Bryan Stevenson's work and you're familiar with his work, and he talks about the work that we do as being stone catchers. In Bryan Stevenson's landmark book, Just Mercy, he refers to a story of when Jesus intervened to save a woman accused of adultery from being stoned. Jesus tells her accusers, "Let him who is without sin among you cast the first stone." Stevenson uses the phrase stone catcher to describe the people who catch the stones people cast at each other. As criminal defense attorneys, we can't simply watch the government throw stones. We have to be stone catchers. I recently read something, The Dictionary of the Undoing by John Freeman. It's a small little book. I'll give you a copy here before you leave. And one of the things he talks about there is the ability to carry hope.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's really we're stone catchers. But to me, that just captured the like weight of what you're carrying Mr. Bundy's hope.
Yep.
You're carrying Mr. Booker's hope.
Yep.
You're carrying your client's hope.
Absolutely.
And whew, that can get heavy.
No, that's absolutely right. But on the other hand, it's so important. We have a client who is convicted of murder. We're pretty sure that he is innocent, and the state has recently made some concessions that suggest to me that they probably know that he's innocent. But when we first met him, he was so bummed out, so depressed. Couldn't get him to focus. He seemed to have no interest at all in his case. His family is sort of what got us into the case. And so part of what we did, and with the students too, was to try to get him to see some hope in his situation.
Yeah.
And once we did that, incredible, different person.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. I love that about you. I love doing that. But there's also this, the weight of it is almost this, like, it might not work out.
Exactly.
We might lose.
Because you got to tell them that too.
We might lose. The execution might happen.
Yep.
The conviction might occur.
Yep.
Yep. And do you talk about that with your students?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a death penalty clinic before I did the Wrongful Convictions Clinic at Duke. And I ended it because what was happening was that we were only getting cases where the state was trying to carry out an execution. And so we were trying to get a stay of an execution. And I didn't want to put our students through that in the event that we were not successful.
Yeah.
I didn't, that's
a hell of a weight for a 23-year-old to.
Yeah. So we and then the state stopped executing people informally. So at that point, I then switched from doing death penalty to doing wrongful convictions. But yeah, I mean, I say to our students that, we've got to be honest with our client. We've got to let them know that we're going to do everything that we can possibly do, but it might not be enough. And, so we have to prepare them for that. But, we still have to, make the effort.
Yeah. And then we participate in a system that we think is unfair.
Yeah.
But also, I think, not that there's not other participants that sometimes shine a light on fairness or can bring things. I mean, we're not the only ones, but
no, exactly.
But I feel like oftentimes we are the ones that, even though I'm embarrassed by what the criminal justice system does on a macro level,
Yeah.
that I have some responsibility because I'm in that system to bring that dignity.
I agree.
To that, even though nobody else in the system is going to do it.
I agree. And others in the system don't appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, I think
what we're doing.
that's, and again, I know we're all, my little tiny violin for myself and my colleagues, but I don't think the people that don't do this work necessarily understand how we're helping them, give them credibility.
Exactly.
How we're helping the whole system have credibility, just because if our client feels like they've been heard, if they feel like they've been heard, the system's better.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I used to think when I was trying to stop an execution, that our client might have been better off if I had quit the case.
Yeah.
Because then the state wouldn't be able to carry out the execution, at least at that time, until they brought somebody else in.
Oh.
But I thought, in the end, but on the other hand, I have an obligation to my client not to desert him.
Yeah, right.
And to fight this battle. And
just even going back to some of what you were saying, there's, you'd said the attorneys in Bundy had just been beaten down, right? Or even oftentimes by the time you in post-conviction must get to the clients, they've been beaten down.
Yep.
And, they may not even recognize their own dignity or their own humanity.
Yep.
And you're the one that has to come in there and almost, reach down and pull them up and build them up.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you, before Bundy was executed, he wanted to. I mean, we had one issue left, and that was going to the Supreme Court, and they were either going to hear it or not. We lost, 5-4. They denied us stay. But what he wanted to do, because now he was desperate. He was worried about that, actually being executed.
Sure.
And so he wanted to make an offer to law enforcement officials in the different states that he would help them find bodies if they would give him the time to do that.
Okay.
And I tried to talk him out of that.
Really?
I said that, they're never gonna agree to give you more time, because now they've got you in a place where they're going to execute you. And, people are going to say, well, that's just like him to do something like that. So I said, if you want to tell people where bodies are and you can remember, just do that.
Don't do it in exchange. It shouldn't be transactional.
Don't make it transactional. And I said, at this point, because I honestly did not think there was any way we were going to get a stay, even though, as I said, we lost 5-4 in the Supreme Court on our issue. But I said, so what you ought to do now is do it with dignity.
Sure.
Don't make people say, well, he's exactly what we thought he was.
Y.
Yeah, exactly what we thought he was. I said, do it with some dignity.
Did he take you up on that?
No. What he did was he tried to arrange to a woman who was a lawyer, tried to arrange to have, to do this deal. So a couple of the investigators who had been working on his cases came in and talked to him. And I got a call from him at the end of the first day, and he was disappointed that they weren't interested in why he had done what he did, and they were only interested in bodies. And so where exactly? And so he didn't want to, said he wasn't going to do it anymore. So what
Turns out James Coleman knows what he's talking about again.
Yeah, exactly. So what I did was to arrange for our psychiatrist, Dorothy Lewis from Yale, to come down on the last full day before he was executed and meet with him. to talk about whatever he wanted to talk about. And she didn't report back to me. I have no idea what the conversation was, but I knew that he respected her and that he seemed more interested in kind of what went wrong with him in the way he was wired or whatever. And so I gave him that opportunity to, spend the day with her. And then,
and he did that?
Yeah, he did. And then he was executed the next day. But, yeah.
But he got that day, right?
But he got that day. When Bundy was executed, one of the saddest things for me was when I drove out of the prison and, there's a crowd that had gathered to cheer. And that was really, really sad.
Yeah, just the humanities,
and they didn't understand. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They didn't see him as a person. They didn't understand the issues that we had just lost, and they didn't care about any of that. They had little kids there on the side of the road, and we had to drive, by them. Oh, that was really, really sad.
Talk about its culture. We were talking before about just how cultures shape us in the culture that you had before, and that's a culture that is sometimes shaped by the media, shaped by other people. It's just going to keep repeating. Yeah. You've called yourself a happy warrior, right?
That's Senator Humphrey.
Okay.
That's where I got that from. That's what he was referred to as a happy warrior.
All right.
Because
and you see yourself?
He was doing civil rights battles and losing. And so I started to see myself, or at least describe myself that way, that, I am happy to be able to do what I'm doing. I wish it were fair. I wish I was more successful in some of the cases that I've lost. But I think it's important for the work that I do and for myself and for my clients that I not, I allow it to wear me out and grind me down and turn me bitter.
Yeah, because we need James Coleman,
but we need somebody who is going to be engaged in the fight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
At least at the trial level, right? I've been thankful that the last couple of trials I've won, but they've definitely, any trial lawyer has lost cases, and they hurt, they hurt. But it's a balance that at least I found that, you can learn from the losing, and it's sad because I don't want to think of my client as an object to help me move along.
Right.
But my new client, my next client, my client on the next day, they don't care that I lost.
Yep.
Like I got to go perform for them.
Exactly.
And there's in some way, it's this, you're recognizing the dignity and the humanity of your clients, but you have to also, for lack of better, be able to move on so that you can continue to push more balls up the hill, I guess, push more rocks up the hill, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that's kind of the bottom line, really, is that the work we do it because we do want it to be better. We want the system to be better. And we think that we can make, even if it's a small contribution to that, we can do it. And, part of the way I make a contribution to that is to try to instill that in my students, so that when they become lawyers, that'll matter to them.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I have no doubt you've done that. And so, well, thanks for bringing all of that here to Hudson and to our little sanctuary in this moment. And
this is great. I love this. This is really great.
Oh, good. Wonderful.
Good
Thanks again, sir. Thanks for listening to Sanctuary in the Jungle. This episode was brought to you by Nelson Defense Group and Made Daily. We'll see you next time for another episode. Until then, stay strong and carry the hope.